The most dangerous phase after leaving a narcissist isn't the breakup. It's not the fight. It's not even the moment you finally walk away. It happens after, quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. And most people don't realize they're inside it until they've already been pulled back into the cycle again. Because leaving a narcissist doesn't immediately break the emotional attachment. In many ways, that's when the psychological battle actually begins. And this is where people get confused, because once the relationship ends, everyone expects healing to start immediately. Freedom, relief, peace. But that's not what usually happens first. First comes silence. And silence can feel terrifying. Because during the relationship, your nervous system adapted to emotional chaos, to unpredictability, to emotional highs and lows, to constantly monitoring someone else's moods, reactions, distance, and approval. That becomes your emotional normal. So when the relationship suddenly ends, your body doesn't immediately feel safe. It feels destabilized. And this is the phase almost nobody talks about. Because externally, it looks like you escaped. But internally, part of you still feels emotionally connected to the person who hurt you. And that contradiction is what makes this phase so dangerous. Because now, you're vulnerable to one thing narcissists understand extremely well: emotional confusion. And confusion keeps people emotionally attached longer than pain ever could. That's why the first phase after leaving often feels surreal. One moment, you remember the manipulation clearly, the gaslighting, the emotional exhaustion, the anxiety, and the next moment, you miss them. Not logically, emotionally. And that emotional conflict creates the perfect opening for the cycle to restart. Because now, your brain starts trying to reduce the discomfort, trying to make sense of the contradiction. How can someone hurt me this badly and still feel so hard to let go of? That question alone pulls millions of people back into toxic cycles because they mistake emotional attachment for emotional meaning. But attachment doesn't always mean love. Sometimes attachment is simply conditioning. And narcissistic relationships create extremely powerful conditioning patterns, especially through inconsistency. Because inconsistency creates obsession. Your brain becomes trained to chase emotional resolution constantly. The affection disappears, then returns. The distance appears, then disappears. And over time, your nervous system becomes addicted to relief. That's why leaving feels so painful at first. Not because the relationship was healthy, because your body adapted to surviving instability. And this next part is where the danger increases dramatically. Because narcissists understand something most people don't. They understand timing. They know the emotional crash after separation rarely happens immediately. At first, people often feel angry, empowered, certain. But eventually, the emotional loneliness begins. And loneliness changes perception. Now your brain starts replaying memories differently. The good moments become louder. The manipulation becomes quieter. And this is exactly when narcissists often reappear. Not during your strongest moment, during your most emotionally vulnerable one. And that timing is rarely accidental. Because narcissists don't always return impulsively. Sometimes they wait strategically, long enough for your defenses to weaken, long enough for confusion to replace certainty. Long enough for you to start questioning your own reality again. And this is where the most dangerous phase truly begins. Because now, the narcissist no longer needs to overpower you emotionally. They just need to reconnect emotionally. Even slightly, a message, a reaction, a casual, hey, something small enough to feel harmless but powerful enough to reopen emotional access. And once emotional access returns, the cycle starts rebuilding itself quietly. Not the relationship, the attachment. Because trauma bonds don't react to logic, they react to emotional triggers. And narcissists understand your emotional triggers deeply. They know your empathy, your guilt, your longing for closure, your desire to believe people can change. And this is where many people misinterpret what's happening. Because the narcissist suddenly seems different, calmer, kinder, more emotionally aware. And after weeks or months of distance, that version feels incredibly convincing. That's what makes this phase so dangerous. Because the return rarely feels toxic at first. It feels hopeful. And hope is harder to resist than pain, especially when your nervous system still associates them with emotional relief. But here's the truth most people discover too late. The narcissist often isn't returning because they deeply changed emotionally. They're returning because they feel the loss of control emotionally. And those are two very different things. Because narcissists struggle intensely with losing emotional influence over people, especially people who once centered them emotionally. That's why they often return softer, more patient, more emotionally intelligent. They adapt to regain access. And adaptation can look exactly like transformation if you're emotionally vulnerable enough. That's why this phase becomes so psychologically dangerous. Because now, you're no longer reacting from pain. You're reacting from possibility. And possibility creates emotional blindness. You start thinking, maybe enough time passed. Maybe they finally understand. Maybe this time really is different. But here's what most people miss. Real change creates consistency, not temporary emotional performance. And narcissists often maintain change only while uncertainty exists. The moment emotional certainty returns, the old patterns slowly return too. That's why the cycle repeats so often, because the return phase feels emotionally different from the original relationship. Calmer, more intentional, more emotionally safe at first, but eventually, control patterns reappear. The inconsistency, the subtle guilt, the emotional confusion, the unpredictability. Because once access feels secure again, the performance relaxes. And this next part is where many people lose themselves completely. Because after returning, the second emotional collapse often feels worse than the first. Now, the person doesn't just feel heartbroken, they feel ashamed, confused, angry at themselves, because they believe the return meant something deeper. And narcissists understand that too. That's why they often weaponize hope unconsciously. Hope keeps people emotionally available. Hope keeps the emotional door unlocked. But here's the deeper truth. The most dangerous phase after leaving a narcissist isn't when you miss them. It's when you start romanticizing the relief they gave you after the pain they caused. Because now, your brain starts confusing emotional relief with emotional safety. And those are not the same thing. Relief simply means the pain paused temporarily. Safety means the pain no longer exists. And narcissistic relationships rarely create lasting emotional safety. They create cycles of emotional destabilization followed by temporary relief. That cycle conditions people deeply, which is why no contact feels so difficult initially. Not because you lost your soulmate, because your nervous system became attached to unpredictability. And unpredictability creates emotional dependency over time, especially when mixed with affection and emotional intensity. That's why this phase requires something most people underestimate: psychological awareness. Because awareness interrupts the emotional illusion. Awareness helps you recognize patterns before you emotionally re enter them. And once you recognize the pattern, the emotional pull weakens slowly, not overnight, but consistently. Because now you stop interpreting every message emotionally. You stop romanticizing timing. You stop seeing their return as destiny. Instead, you start seeing cycles, strategies, emotional patterns. And that changes everything. Because a narcissistic cycle survives through confusion. Confused people stay emotionally engaged. They analyze, replay conversations, search for hidden meaning, hope for emotional resolution. But clarity destroys confusion. And once clarity begins, the emotional dependency weakens dramatically. That's why narcissists often escalate during this phase, because emotionally detached people become harder to control. Suddenly, the guilt increases, the emotional pressure increases, the urgency increases. Sometimes they become extremely emotional. Other times, cold and distant, because inconsistency itself becomes manipulation. The unpredictability keeps your nervous system emotionally activated. And activated people struggle thinking clearly. That's why healing after narcissistic abuse requires more than distance. It requires emotional stabilization. Because if your nervous system remains addicted to chaos, silence will feel unbearable. And unbearable silence pushes people back toward familiar pain, even toxic pain. Because familiar pain feels psychologically safer than unfamiliar peace. And that realization changes everything. Because now you understand why the return felt so powerful. Not because the connection was healthy, because the conditioning was deep. And once you see that clearly, you stop blaming yourself for struggling emotionally. You stop interpreting your attachment as proof the relationship was special. You begin understanding what actually happened psychologically. Your nervous system adapted to emotional inconsistency. Your brain became conditioned around relief cycles. And narcissists reinforced those cycles constantly. That's why leaving feels so psychologically destabilizing. But here's the part that changes your life. The most dangerous phase after leaving a narcissist eventually becomes the most transformative one too. Because if you survive this stage without reopening the emotional cycle, something powerful happens. Your nervous system begins resetting slowly. Peace stops feeling boring. Stability stops feeling unfamiliar. Silence stops feeling threatening. And for the first time, you begin experiencing relationship differently, without emotional panic, without constant uncertainty, without needing chaos to feel connection. That's when everything changes permanently. Because now, you don't just understand the narcissist, you understand the cycle itself. And once you understand the cycle, you stop mistaking emotional intensity for love. You stop confusing relief with safety. You stop interpreting their return as proof of transformation. And most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself emotionally as just to keep someone else connected to you. And that's why this phase is so dangerous. Because it's the moment people either re-enter the cycle or finally break free from it. And the difference between those two outcomes usually comes down to one thing: whether you interpret their return emotionally or recognize it psychologically.